If your child is still using their fingers to help them work out their maths, you've probably had a moment of wondering whether you should be doing something about it. You might have noticed your child using their fingers out in the open or hiding their hands under the table, in their pocket, or behind their back. A child who hides what they're doing with their fingers has usually picked up from somewhere that they shouldn't be doing it. Maybe a teacher has said something. Maybe it's never been said directly, but they've noticed what other children their age seem to be doing instead. Either way, the fingers haven't just become a strategy. They've become something to be a bit ashamed of. And alongside all of this, you're wondering what comes next. Should your child still be using their fingers at this age? And if not, what should you be moving them toward and how? That's what this episode is all about. Welcome to Safety in Numbers, a podcast for parents of children who struggle with maths, including those with dyscalculia or a specific learning difficulty in maths. In each episode, we explore what might be happening when maths feels difficult and what parents can do to better understand and support their child. To understand what's actually going on, it helps to step back from fingers completely for a moment and think about something I briefly mentioned back in episode 4. We're all born with a rough, built-in sense of quantity. Not counting is learned later, but something more automatic than that. A sense of more or fewer or about how many that doesn't need any counting at all. Now, in episode 4, I talked about why researchers think this exists. Knowing at a glance whether there's enough food or which group has more people or whether you're outnumbered by predators, these were the kinds of quick judgments that mattered long before anyone invented arithmetic. This is referred to as the approximate number system. It's found in human babies before they can talk and in a range of species from fish to primates. It's part of what we're born with, not something school teaches us. So what does that have to do with fingers? Well, that built-in sense is particularly good at recognizing small amounts instantly without counting. Think about playing cards or the dots on a dice. Most people don't count 4 diamonds on a card or 4 dots on a dice one by one. They just see 4 all at once as a shape. Hands can work in the same way. 5 fingers don't have to be 5 separate things a child counts out one at a time. 5 can be one shape, a whole hand, recognized instantly. The same way most people recognize 4 dots on a card or a dice without counting them. That's the distinction I want you to hold on to here. There's a difference between counting fingers one by one and recognizing a group of fingers instantly as a whole amount. And we'll explore this as the episode continues. I want to introduce you to a 9-year-old child I assessed some time back. I asked him to add 7 to a number. He began by using his fingers and counted them one by one, putting up one finger at a time. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, treating each finger as a 1. He got the answer correct, so his process worked, but it was slow, and it told me he was still working from a counting sequence rather than from any secure sense of how 7 can be made. Let's compare that to another child I assessed who was also 9. When I asked her to show me 7 fingers, she didn't count each one. Instead, she held up one hand and counted on from 5, 2 more. She saw the number 7 as 5 and a bit. That's one whole hand, 5 recognized instantly with no counting needed, and 2 more fingers on the other hand. That's not just a faster way to get to 7, it's a different kind of understanding. It's the beginning of putting together and breaking apart numbers. We call that composition and decomposition of numbers. Seeing that 7 is made up of parts rather than a chain of 7 separate ones. It's the same kind of thinking your child will build on later when numbers get bigger and place understanding is developed. For example, knowing that 24 is made up of 2 10s and 4 1s. Let's think about these 2 examples. Both children were using their fingers, but one was using them as a tally, the other was using them as a structure for how numbers actually work. There's a second separate strand of research worth knowing about here, alongside everything we've just covered about seeing amounts instantly. It's called finger gnosis, and it's about something different. Not whether a child can see a hand as 5 at a glance, but whether they have a clear internal sense of their own fingers, purely by feel without looking. This might sound unrelated to maths, but researchers such as Brian Butterworth have found that finger gnosis in early childhood tends to go together with stronger number ability later on. Research on exactly why isn't fully settled, and not every study agrees on how strong the link is. But it's another reason fingers seem to matter more than they're usually given credit for. Not just as something children see, but as something they feel. This is the piece of information that tends to get lost when fingers get treated as something to grow out of. The advice to stop using fingers usually comes from watching the tallying version, the slow one-by-one counting, and assuming that's what using fingers always means. But fingers used structurally, the way they're used with 5 and a bit thinking, aren't a workaround. And given the research on finger gnosis specifically, there's a real possibility that taking fingers away too early doesn't just remove a tool, it interrupts something still developing internally because of it. Let's turn our attention to the age at which fingers are still being used. Where age does matter is in which of these 2 approaches to calculation a child is still using and for how long. A 5 or 6-year-old counting on with fingers is doing exactly what you'd expect at that stage. It's how number sense typically develops. An 11-year-old still counting one by one on their fingers to work out 7 plus 8, with no sense of 5 and a bit or any other structure beneath it, is a different picture. That's not a child who needs telling to stop using their fingers. That's a child whose fingers never got the chance to move from tallying into structure, and that is the bit worth paying attention to, not the use of the fingers themselves. Let's return to the 9-year-old boy I mentioned earlier, the one who counted 7 as a tallying version. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, not a 5 and a bit version. 5, 6, 7. Let's imagine he has been told to stop using his fingers. What's the impact of this being imposed upon him? Firstly, fingers have become the only tool that he has developed for holding on to number. That tool has suddenly been taken away from him before anything's replaced it, but he doesn't suddenly develop a new way of working. He loses the one that was working, however slowly, and is left using the same counting method mentally without anything to keep track of where they've got to. That's harder to do accurately, and it's far more error-prone. It's easy to lose count of what number you're up to when you can't see your fingers keeping the tally for you. So a child who was getting the right answer, albeit slowly with their fingers, can start getting the wrong answer at the same speed or slower once the fingers are gone. To an adult watching, that looks like the child doesn't understand the concept of addition, when actually they understood addition fine when they could use their fingers. And what's failed is the enforced method, not the understanding beneath it. And there's a second effect, separate from the maths itself. A child who's been told, directly or by implication, to stop doing something that was working for them tends to draw a conclusion about themselves, not just about fingers. Carol Dweck's work on mindset is relevant here. A child in this position isn't just learning don't use fingers. They're often learning something closer to there's something wrong with how I do maths, which is a very different and much harder thing to unlearn later. That's the child. Now to you as the parent. If you're the parent of a child who's still using their fingers, you're often caught between two things that don't agree with each other. You can see plainly that the fingers are helping. Your child gets the right answer. But you've also picked up from a teacher or just a general sense of what other children their age seem to be doing that fingers are something to be moved on from. Those two things don't sit together easily, and most parents I speak to end up doing one of two things with that tension. I remember a mum I worked with who described exactly this situation. Her son's teacher had told her quite firmly that he needed to stop using his fingers, that it was holding him back. But at home, she could see the opposite. He was confident using his fingers and getting things right. She told me she'd started making him use his fingers under the table because she didn't feel she had the standing to disagree with his teacher. She said, I felt like I was choosing between trusting my own eyes and trusting the professional whose job this is. That's a parent being handed two conflicting messages and having no way to know which one was actually right for her child. Some parents toe the school's line even while their gut says otherwise because a teacher's judgment feels more authoritative than a parent's instinct, especially on something like maths teaching. Others let their child keep using their fingers, but perhaps feel uneasy about it, wondering if they're storing up a problem by not correcting it now. Neither of those is a comfortable place to be, and neither is your fault. You're being asked to referee a disagreement between two things that both sound reasonable. My child needs to move on, and my child is doing fine, without necessarily having the information to know which one is actually true for your child. That's not a failure of judgment on your part. It's what happens when the advice going round doesn't match what the research actually says. Some parents do find their way through this, and it's usually not by picking a side and holding firm. It's by asking a different question. Instead of, should my child stop using their fingers, they ask, what is my child actually doing with their fingers and is it working? That question doesn't need a teacher's authority or a parent's instinct to settle it. It just needs watching. And watching is something you're in a better position to do than almost anyone else because you see your child doing maths far more often and in far more ordinary moments than a teacher with a class of 30 children ever will. So where does this leave you practically with your own child? Start by watching rather than intervening straight away. Next time your child reaches for their fingers, notice which version you're seeing. Are they counting one by one, putting up each finger individually, working through the whole number as a sequence? Or are they using a shortcut, recognizing a hand as 5 without counting it, then adding on from there? That single observation tells you more than any general rule about should my child still be using their fingers ever could, because the two versions aren't the same problem and they don't need the same response. If what you're seeing is the second version, the 5 and a bit, the instant recognition of a hand as a whole amount, that's not something to correct. That's your child doing exactly the kind of structural thinking this episode has been about. Leave it alone. It's working and it's building towards something. If what you're seeing is the first version, the slow one by one counting every time with no shortcut in sight, that's where it's worth doing something, but not what you might expect. The answer isn't to remove the fingers. Based on everything we've covered about finger gnosis and what taking the tool away too early can do, that's likely to make things worse, not better. The answer is to build the shortcut alongside the fingers that are already there. Here's a simple way to start. Show your child a hand of 5 fingers, and rather than asking them to count it, ask them to just look at it and say how many without counting. Do this often, and in small moments, not as in a test, but something you do together casually, the way you might ask them to spot a number on a car registration plate. The goal is for 5 to become something they recognize instantly, the way you recognize the dots on the dice or the 4 diamonds on the card, rather than something they need to count out every time. Once 5 is secure as an instant shape, build from there. Show 4 fingers and 1 more. Show a whole hand and 2 fingers on the other hand and ask what that makes without counting from 1. You're not teaching a new fact each time. You're giving your child practice at seeing numbers as parts that combine rather than as a chain of individual ones. And this builds the foundations of further calculations. This kind of thinking becomes especially useful once the numbers get bigger. Take 38, add 7. A child still counting one by one will count on from 38 7 separate times. That's slow and easy to lose track of. But a child who's comfortable splitting numbers into parts can do something different. Split the 7 into 2 and 5. Use the 2 first to take 38 up to 40. Now that's a round, easy number to remember and add something to. Then add the remaining 5 to get to 45. That's the same 5 and a bit thinking that I talked about earlier, just working in the other direction, breaking a number apart to make the calculation easier, rather than putting 2 amounts together. It's a strategy called bridging through 10, and it only works if a child is comfortable breaking numbers into parts in the first place, which is exactly what the finger work that I talked about earlier is building towards. If your child is older and still only using the 1 by 1 version, it's worth raising it with school as a question. Has anyone worked with them on recognizing amounts instantly or putting numbers together and breaking them apart rather than just counting them? If a child of that age has never made that shift, it's unlikely to happen without some direct support, and it's a reasonable thing to discuss. One final thing. Don't let your child see their fingers as something to hide. If you've noticed your child hiding their fingers, it's worth addressing that directly, not just through what you do with the maths itself. Children don't need a lecture about it. Usually a short matter-of-fact comment does more than a longer conversation would. Something like, "I saw you counting on your fingers. That's a great way to work it out," says what needs saying without making a moment of it. If they've already been told elsewhere that it's something to grow out of, it's worth being direct about that too. Some people may tell you not to use your fingers. Mathematicians use tools all the time, and your fingers are a tool that helps you. I don't want you hiding something that's actually helping you. The goal isn't a big conversation. It's just making sure the shame doesn't get to sit there unchallenged. I've put together a companion guide for this episode, a free PDF linked in the show notes. It provides some further support on how you can encourage your child to understand their numbers as parts and use their fingers more effectively. In the next episode, we're going to look at why methods seem to fall apart under pressure and what you can do to support your child in these situations. Thank you for being here. If you found this episode helpful, please do share it with another parent who might need it. And if you'd like to make sure you don't miss future episodes, you can subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts or follow the Safety in Numbers YouTube channel. Until next time, thank you for listening.